When anyone talks about LSU football right now, heading into 2025, it carries a lot of expectation. And the reason for that is they completely revamped the roster. LSU has had a talent deficiency, specifically on defense, the last 2 seasons. And that's where, in signing this number 1 transfer portal class, you really saw them attack. Yes, you brought in some nice offensive weapons, Bowers, Sharp, Nick Anderson, Barry and Brown. Like you brought in guys, a couple offensive linemen, but where you really saw them go hard was on defense, because that's where you lacked the most. You saw them bring in 3 awesome edge rushers. And then in the defensive backfield, they really took onus on that and revamped things. And it was easier because specifically at safety, which we're really going to focus in on here, you were losing a lot. Major Burns was out of eligibility. Sage Ryan transferred. Kylan Jackson transferred. Like a lot of your guys there, they were out. So you weren't returning a whole bunch anyway, so you needed to go do it. And you bring in TaMarcus Cooley, you bring in AJ Halsey. We were talking with Preston Guy earlier. You even bring in a guy like Mansour Delane who could play corner or safety. You bring in a lot of guys with a lot of versatility that can impact your team. And from a talent standpoint, immediately make you better and improve your roster. Like that's been the whole conversation. And rightfully so. But there is one guy who I look at in the defensive backfield and specifically the safety position that I go, man, are we all kind of sleeping on him? And it's Dashawn Spears. Blake Baker was a guest on Off the Bench with Jacob Hester on, I guess that would have been Wednesday. And he was asked this question about younger guys who they really saw step up and kind of even become leaders and whatnot during spring and things of that nature. And he went through 4, and one of them was PJ Woodland, and it was a quick blurb. The other, Devon Keys, just a quick, like, we're challenging him type deal. Gabe Relaford, he mentioned, and kind of went a little bit more in depth. But the longest part of that answer was about a minute long in total. The longest part of that answer was when he talked about Dashawn Spears.
Deshawn Spears, I've been very vocal about there was nobody harder on Deshawn Spears than me last year. And that's just because of the potential that young man has. And to see him starting to really break through this spring, not only from a tackling standpoint, physical standpoint, his leadership out on the back end, he had a really outstanding spring.
Blake Baker there, no one was harder on him a year ago than he was. Talks about the improvements in tackling and all that, even the leadership. That's great. But the part of that is the potential. When he talks about the potential that Dashawn Spears has. It's easy when you bring in everything that you did to forget that you have a guy in Dashawn Spears who's 6'3", 205 pounds, was the number 3 safety in America coming out of Denham Springs in the class of 2024. Sitting there. And I'll give you a little bit more context on why, if you're looking at someone to potentially break in to that safety room this year, why it could be Dashawn Spears. He's got the experience. So we mentioned all the guys you lost. Even before that, when you looked at LSU safety room, Dashawn Spears a year ago played the 4th most snaps. You really settled into that rotation with Burns, Sage Ryan, and Jordan Gilbert. Like you settled on those guys when you got into the meat of the SEC and you went forward. But there was Dashawn Spears right behind them at 205 defensive snaps. Over 300 if you count what he did on special teams in his first year. He played in 13 games for LSU a year ago. When you look outside of Jordan Gilbert of what you're returning, and yes, Joel Rogers had a great spring, really flashed. Javian Toviano, same deal. And without Jordan Gilbert there, they all got a lot of run. But when you look at those guys, the only one with the actual experience from a year ago is Dashawn Spears. Just looking at that, you would think, okay, yeah, it makes sense. He might be the next guy in line, and maybe he should be. Then you get into actual performance from Spears, and he graded out great as a run blocker per Pro Football Focus. But when you get just into grades as a whole, looking at LSU's safety room from a year ago, and you kind of just you take them all, you ignore the snap count, Dashawn Spears is your highest graded returning safety. Not Jordan Gilbert, not Javen Toviano, it's Dashawn Spears. The grade's not going to jump off the page at you. It's 61. It's not great. But the other guys that got some run, and I should preface with Jordan Gilbert, obviously he was playing through injury all of last year, so much so that he had an off-season procedure, and he's going to be back for camp. I had to get that right. He was playing through something that needed a procedure. But I think that speaks volumes. And again, you could say, okay, well, the performance on the field, what did it look like? And I think there's two different ways to look at it. You could see early in the season, Deshawn Spears played a lot against South Carolina, against UCLA, South Alabama, when they were still feeling it out. Remember how they worked with the safeties, right, with LSU? It was, they rotated them all in to really see who they had, and they settled on their guys before SEC play started. So Spears got a lot of run in those games. I mean, he was playing 40, 50 snaps in those games. The grades weren't great. When you got later into the season and he started getting into some of those SEC games, two of his highest graded games this year are Nicholls, Texas A&M, and Alabama. So later in the year, when you continue to give him run, okay, and it limited snap counts. He played 13 snaps against Alabama. He played 8 against Texas A&M, and they were mainly in the run game. But the grade improved. And again, like I said, there's two ways you can look at it. You can look at it and be like, okay, yeah, well, when he played earlier in the year and actually got extended run, he wasn't very good. And that's true. And you could look at the other part and be like, yeah, when he played in those SEC games, it was probably those games kind of got out of hand. It was maybe just in mop-up duty. What's he really going against? That is one way to look at it. If you want to take more of a glass half full look at it, you could say, yeah, the grades weren't great early in the season when he played a bunch, but those were like the first 4 or 5 games of his college career. There's going to be an adjustment period there, regardless of who you play. And then, no matter what the role was, when he got in there against better competition, it did improve. That shows growth from the reps he was getting in practice and even in games going forward. That's more the glass half full look. The one thing I will say, though, is that guy's extremely talented. He's got immense untapped potential, so much so that as a true freshman, he played the 4th most defensive snaps on your team for a safety. And now you have that guy coming back and a defensive coordinator like Blake Baker who is excellent at putting his players in the positions they need to be successful. You've seen many players develop in his system when he's talking about how hard he is on that guy, how much he's challenging that guy because he knows how good he can be. And that's in May, before you even get through summer workouts and fall camp. Yeah, I look at Dashawn Spears as a guy who could potentially break into this room. Blake Baker wasn't done. He talked about, or I should say, Jacob Hester asked him, is the safety room the most wide open room on the field because of everything that you've added?
There's a great mix of old and young when you look at Jordan Gilbert. You look at A.J. Halsey, those two guys playing a lot of snaps. Then you got Toviano, who's kind of bounced around in the secondary, but I thought he had a really good spring. Deshawn Spears is a young guy. Mansour can go back there. Tamarcus Cooley, he had a really good spring, who's a sophomore. So I think that room is really improved from a personnel standpoint here in the last 6 months, and I cannot wait to see them on the field.
And we talked about it earlier in the show. The depth of the safety room and your defensive back room as a whole. Like LSU has the ability to get multiple guys on the field at a time out of the guys they've brought in. And look, don't get me wrong. Like A.J. Halsey's playing a huge role on this team. You bring him in, he's immediately the highest graded safety on your team. Immediately. Same with Tamarcus Cooley. Those two guys, they're going to play. Jordan Gilbert's going to play. But you played Dashawn Spears all over the field last year. At free, in the box, at slot. Like, you played him everywhere to see kind of where he fit best. You know TaMarcus Cooley can play nickel. Like, you can maneuver things around and potentially find a way to get him on the field. And if he gets on the field and shows what he's built on, then there's no reason not to believe that by November or so, he hasn't potentially broken his way into this safety room and into the rotation and is playing meaningful reps for LSU. And I think that's honestly one of the best case scenarios for LSU, because that's an extremely talented guy with a lot of potential that can absolutely help you if the improvement takes and if he can bring that to the field. And I think he might just be flying under the radar a little bit too much because of everything that you've brought in and the talent that you've brought in. And I get it. But don't forget about the kid who was the number 3 safety in America, just sitting there working hard and waiting for his opportunity. I think that opportunity comes at some point in 2025, and I can't wait to see if he takes advantage of it. Because what we all thought about Dashawn Spears when he signed with LSU, that he could be the next great safety, I think all that still holds true. We'll get our answer come fall in 2025. Tigers open the season, obviously, against Clemson on August the 30th.
Hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.